So today our topic is being fully telepathic and empathic in the world. And I feel like this is very important because the world's been so crazy and we've lived in this really curious darkness for a couple millennia, whether it's Kali Yuga, which is a way that they look at eras of time in the Vedas, that this was a very dark time that we've lived in. And so suddenly to be able to be telepathic, to actually read each other's minds, or empathic, to feel each other's feelings, that's a really scary thing. But the real focus of today's talk is that it's not scary because the abilities are scary. It's scary because of the philosophies we hold about interacting with each other. It's almost like these divine human characteristics or abilities don't fit the philosophies or the paradigm or the zeitgeist that we've been living in for the last 2 millennia. So today's talk is partly about shifting or really seeing the paradigm that we've been living in, which makes telepathy and empathy so difficult. And also understanding that, okay, that's great and everything. I can shift paradigms. I can shift perspectives and zeitgeists. Or zeitgeist isn't even an English word, just so you know, because I know there's lots of non-English people listening. But it's just a way of seeing the world. It's almost like, 100 years ago, there were certain things that were simply accepted. And that was the way that we made all of our decisions, like within that idea. That's a zeitgeist. And we don't even know it's there. It's almost more specific than a paradigm. But anyway, it's not important. But I just love that word. So I think it's very descriptive, even though it's German, it's not even English. So as much as we may shift our own paradigm to allow for our telepathy and to allow for our empathy to flow, the rest of the world may not be there. So how do we still live here? How do we still integrate into the world and have relationships and work in the world and pay our bills and, dance and play with everybody when we're not necessarily living in the same paradigm, but we still want to allow our telepathy. We want to grow our telepathy and our empathic gifts. How do we do that in a world that maybe doesn't share a paradigm where this is easy? So those are the two big aspects that we're going to talk about in our talk today. So these two aspects really follow the two ways of even looking at the world. The one way is understanding that we really do live in a oneness, that spiritually we really are all connected. We share a heart, we share an intention, we share a consciousness on a very high or deep level, however we want to look at that. And that's a truth. That when we close our eyes and we meditate or we pray and we sit by the ocean or we sit by a mountain and we tune in to our deepest self, we are eternal. We are a oneness, and that oneness is shared by every single person here. So within that context, it makes total sense that we're telepathic. If we all share a oneness, if we all share a world together, well, of course we can communicate in that oneness. Maybe it's through thought forms. Maybe it's through feelings and emotions. But it only makes sense that if we are sharing, a great womb or something, or maybe we really are all one energy refracted into 7.5 billion refractions, it makes sense that we would be able to communicate there effortlessly, energetically, instantaneously, right? So on the one hand, we consider this as a beautiful gift of communicating within that collective heart. And it's a really peaceful feeling when we go there. The key is we have to have the right philosophy to allow ourselves to feel peaceful there. And that's where we have to really look at the world where we really are right now. Like, it's one thing to kind of hold this bigger philosophy, which is important, but that may not even be where we personally are right now. And that's why the only reason I'm talking about that is that's the greater container that we want to learn this from. Like, we want to learn this within. So as we dive into the intricacies of our day-to-day life in the third dimensional reality, or in the physical reality, or in the current paradigm that the majority of people are living in, when we look at that, it's easier to be objective when we know that there's a bigger picture that it all belongs to. So one of the things we have to look at, so let's shift into the paradigm that a lot of the world is living in that makes telepathy and empathy difficult. And I'm kind of saying the rest of the world, but the reality is it's inside of us too. This might have been the paradigm that we were raised in our family. This may be the paradigm of our parents, of our children, of our friends, of our family, of the people at work. And of course, the reason it bothers us is because we share it too, right? We share that paradigm. As much as we want to say, no, I see a greater paradigm. That may not be where we're actually living, right? So let's look at the challenges of telepathy and empathy in that world, and that will help us unpack the philosophies we need to really expand in those abilities. One of the great challenges of our past and our present is codependency. If we're in any kind of relationship where we need the other person to act a certain way, we're in big trouble when it comes to telepathy and empathy. Let's say even you're raising children. If we need our children to be successful in a particular way, we're in big trouble. If we need our children to be happy, we're in trouble. And that's a curiosity, right? Because as a parent, of course we want our children to be happy. Of course it's hard to watch them in a hurting space. But the philosophy that we need to really be able to be fully telepathic and empathic is to know that as that oneness split into duality, as it split into 7.5 billion souls, 7.5 billion personalities on this planet, like who knows if we go out into the galaxy, but let's just focus on Earth for now. The very act of splitting into all these different beings was that every being had their own journey to take. There's a reason that we're all individual. There's a reason that we all have individual blueprints, individual DNA sequences, individual consciousness. As much as we share one in the oneness, we also have individual souls. That's why when we look at the chakras and we look at our third chakra, this is whatever our ego is our mission. That every single person has some interesting path to take. Maybe we're unpacking difficulties from our past. Maybe we're creative. Maybe we're just experiencing things. Maybe we're experiencing joy for the first time in 300 lifetimes. I don't know. Whether we believe in multiple lifetimes or not is irrelevant. But who knows why each path of every soul is so incredibly different and unique. But as soon as we hold that paradigm, that belief that every single person has a unique path, well, suddenly the idea of codependency doesn't make sense, right? All of a sudden, the idea that I need you to act a certain way for me to be comfortable doesn't make sense because that person has their own journey. And I have no idea what their journey is. That's between them and the greater wisdom or God or consciousness. That's their individual journey. And the last thing any one of us would ever want to do is interrupt another person's soul's path. So now all of a sudden, we sit within the collective. We sit within the 7.5 billion people, or 8 billion, I don't even know how many people are here now. And we sit here and we look around, and we're all clear. We all have our vertical integration, our integration with divine source and with physical source. So then all of a sudden, within this paradigm, if I know what you're thinking, it's irrelevant to me, right? I have no attachment to what you're thinking. I have no attachment to how you feel. I have no attachment to whether you agree with me or if you have thoughts that I disagree with, or if you have feelings towards me or you don't have feelings towards me. Whether you love me or you hate me or I make you uncomfortable, well, it's irrelevant. That's just that soul's journey. And I'm just someone they have come up against. They have a certain feeling. And then they're going to integrate that some way. That has nothing to do with me. I'm just on my path. So suddenly, empathy and telepathy almost become uninteresting. And this is what allows us the non-attachment and the objectivity to just enjoy it, right? Because the ultimate goal of being telepathic and empathic is just easy communication, right? That if we're just hanging out, words are very limiting. Verbal communication can be effective, but can you imagine using verbal communication and telepathic communication and empathic communication and body language? You imagine all of these things online, all of these things wide open and easily flowing. Imagine how two humans could connect. Imagine how we could communicate, right? You know, I used to laugh that when we were on the farm, my sisters, I have two sisters, and we would get together and we'd be sitting chit-chatting, and my husband would come in from the barn and he'd get a cup of coffee and he would just sit in the room and listen to us. And I remember the first time he said this to me, I thought it was hilarious. You know, later on he said to me, he goes, I don't even understand what you guys are saying. One person says two words, the other person says one, the other person laughs, and then that person says something, and then this person says the tiniest thing. And he said, I couldn't follow anything you guys were saying. And of course, what's interesting among, say, sisters or friends or people who you really know well, right? You know, and it could be anybody. It could be some people that you play sports with. It could be people you work with. It could be friends. It could be lovers. It could be anybody. When the walls are down and we fully trust each other and we know that there's no judgment, so much communication happens in the other realms, in the telepathic realms, in the empathic realms, that all of a sudden, all you have to do is say this one thing and the person's right on your wavelength. And they go, oh, yeah, yeah. And then you, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, I totally, yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're just doing this weird communication. Like, this isn't something that's just for people who are enlightened or gurus or mystics or something like that. You know, all of us can experience this. So this is the goal. So this objectivity, this lack of attachment to what another person is thinking or feeling is really important for us to be able to open our minds to what each other is thinking and feeling. Because if we don't like what we're hearing, we're going to shut down, or we're going to react negatively, and then they're going to shut down. You know, the first time I ever read about this, and I've mentioned this in lots of our classes, is in Marlo Morgan's book, Mutant Message Down Under. And she was a New York journalist, went down to Australia and wanted to do a story on the Aboriginals. And they ended up taking her on a 6-month walkabout. And of course, she wanted to kind of just do this light-hearted article, about this very interesting tribe in Australia. And she ended up learning deep, deep life lessons about what it truly meant to be human. And one of the things is they would all be walking along in this walkabout, and all of a sudden they would all simply turn and walk in another direction. And then they would turn and they would walk in another direction. And there'd be nothing verbally communicated. And it wasn't even that everyone was watching one person and that person turned and then everyone turned. They all were walking and then they all simply shifted. And she asked her guide, she said, "I don't understand." And he said, this is human wiring. The only reason that you guys can't do it, and this is why she was the mutant, right? The people who couldn't actually be fully human. The reason she was mutated is because as a human living in a society where the foundation was judgment, you have to shut down your telepathy and your empathy. Because you don't want anyone to hear what you're thinking, and you don't want anyone to feel what you're feeling, because you personally are afraid of their judgment and you can't handle it either. And this is really important. It comes right down to learning that there is good and evil, that there is right and wrong, there is righteous and there is the sinful. Like these are foundational teachings of judgment. Even in society, we say, yeah, but I mean, you shouldn't be killing people and you shouldn't be this and you shouldn't, this is right, this is wrong. There is an objective right or wrong. And that's a much greater discussion, whether or not this is true. But the fact that we believe it, again, regardless of how it came in, the fact that we believe that there is a right and a wrong way of doing something, there is a right way of thinking and a wrong way of thinking, that will block our telepathy and our empathy every time. And if it doesn't block it, it will twist it. Because then what happens, because we foundationally believe in judgment, if I sense that you think a certain way, I'm going to try to change your mind, or I'm going to avoid you, or I'm going to think negative things about you, and maybe I'll talk about you. Maybe you'll be the next bit of conversation at the next family gathering if you're not there, right? We hear this all the time. Well, that's not what telepathy's for. Maybe you're an empath and you can feel that someone's feeling a certain way and you judge them for feeling that way. What if they just feel like that? And that's all there is to it, right? We don't have to judge them. We also don't have to hang out with them, right? If we're uncomfortable, we don't have to stay with people either. It's that kind of the difference between unconditional love and unconditional tolerance. None of what I'm saying means that without judgment, we just stay and accept all kinds of bad behavior and uncomfortable situations. It's nothing like that. We use these things for discernment, but without the judgment, we just simply, that's not for me, and we move on. Or, wow, you and I really have fun together. We really complement each other. Let's play, let's hang out. None of this requires a judgment. It's just a heartfelt yes or a heartfelt no, and that's it. The other thing is the requirement to honor each other's paths is so important, because for some reason, and we talked about this in our previous talk about the Messiah complex, and this is a huge deal when you're an empath, is that as soon as we believe that we can fix someone else, as soon as we believe that we actually can see another person's path clearer than they can, we're in big trouble. Because what's going to happen is we are actually going to unconsciously use our telepathy and our empathy to try to get inside the mind and feelings of another person so that we can figure out the way we can help them. This is exhausting. And then they're going to have to put up walls to us, because every single person must walk their own path. And it doesn't matter how well-intentioned we are, that other person has to walk their path. So now all of a sudden, we are empathically connected to someone who doesn't want our help. And we're so frustrated. And all we want to do is help, but they just won't listen. And I can't watch this. I can't watch you do this to your life. I can't watch you make another decision that's going to hurt you. You know what I mean? Like there's this real sense of, oh, so then we start shutting down. We actually normally don't. We stay hyper attached and drive each other crazy. But let's say we actually chose to withdraw. Then we go into some kind of state of apathy about the other person. I don't even care. You know what? I'm just going to shut down to you completely because you're not listening. Like, we're not here to fix other people. That's what I mean. Like that mentality or that belief system is going to make us either so frustrated or pull way back and become apathetic. None of this allows us to expand in our gifts. None of this allows us to grow as humans ourselves. None of that allows us to be more sensitive to this amazing, glorious world we live in. There are incredible people here. There are incredible opportunities to really play in this telepathic and empathic world. If we're walking around and every time we meet someone, we think we can fix them, and that's part of our ego attachment to our mission in life or something, we're going to drive ourselves absolutely crazy. So this is why instead we want to look at every person and fully understand that no matter how smart we are, no matter how many books we've read, no matter how many courses we've taken, no matter how much of our own work we've done, we have no idea what's right for another person. None. We at best are seeing a glimpse of their soul's path. Just a glimpse of the iceberg that is their soul's journey. And when we can rest in that knowledge, that they are as connected to God as we are, it is up to them to clear the way. And who knows what their journey is? They're on a completely different path than ours. We can't even see their path. When we can really embrace that, then we can drop our own guards. And if they drop their guards and we get to actually be fully telepathic or partially empathic with them, we get to have such a much richer connection with each other. Because I'm not trying to fix you, and you're not trying to fix me. So then all of a sudden, you can have difficult conversations with each other. And I don't mean difficult between you, but we can actually share difficult aspects of our lives that we're struggling with. And we can open up and have that fuller communication. You can say, wow, that's tough. You know, it reminds me of this movie I watched once. I remember this person once said this thing to me once. Like, you're not trying to fix them. You're just relating, right? You're just relating to them. You know, it's like the great stories from the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I've been very blessed to get to visit and go to the meetings with a friend of mine. And of course, part of the rule is that you're not here to fix anybody, but you can genuinely share your story from your place of truth in your heart space. And if someone else identifies with it, if it helps bring them out of a darkness, awesome. But the only part of your journey is to share your path from your heart and allow other people to witness it. And that's it. Like, there's this beautiful humility, you know, that really helps us openly connect with each other, like a genuine humility, not a false humility, but a genuine humility. You know, it's kind of like really understanding that we're all human. And I don't mean human in a lowly, sinful humans struggling against the shadows of our soul. Like, that's not what I mean. I mean that for some reason, we all incarnated here in duality with a very specific set of experiences. Sometimes we had very difficult upbringing. Sometimes we've had a lot of abuse. Sometimes we simply have lifetimes of karma to unpack. You know, this is hard. But for some reason, this is the human experience. And when we get to look at it that way, we get to look at another human's path and say, holy mackerel, what did you sign up for? Right? You know, but there's no attachment to it. And we're not trying to fix them, and we just honor them. And when we can truly feel like two souls on a journey, and each of us are equally colorful and interesting, we don't try to fix each other because we're deeply doing it ourselves as well. There's also an interesting old paradigm that we have to let go of, and it's this power dynamic, this desire to be the powerful one. Somewhere along the line, this idea of dominance came into our consciousness, that I need to be the dominant one. And in some ways, it's because maybe we were dominated as children, or maybe before. And we feel that if we are the dominant one, then we can't be hurt and we can't be controlled. And as much as it feels like a very evil thing, and I know I'm using judgment terms here, or it feels like a very negative thing, you can't get away from it in our language, right? It also is simply our soul's desire to have the freedom of choice. Sometimes we choose to dominate others because we don't want to lose our freedom of choice. Because on every level, that is the most important thing. Why am I here? Is to walk my path. Well, if I don't have freedom of choice, I can't walk my path. If you oppress me and I'm forced into your reality, this entire life was wasted. I didn't get to walk my soul's journey. This is really, really important. And in a world where domination rules, sometimes we just simply fight back, and we need to be the stronger one, because you will not tell me what to do in my life. You will not tell me what I can or can't do. So I'm going to become the dominant one. And sometimes because of our history, and maybe not even our personal history, maybe it's the sins of the forefathers that we're acting out. Maybe it's karma. Maybe it's ancestral trauma. Who knows why? But for whatever reason, we need to be in charge. So maybe we use anger and temper tantrums to keep other people in their place. Maybe we use money and success and financial security to control other people. Maybe we've lived a life, and this especially happens with women in lots of cultures and lots of places, where because we've been oppressed and we've not been able to work for centuries and millennia, we actually will use our sexuality to control others, right? That's a thing. But we use it to dominate. We use it to power over. And sometimes, if we are an empath, or if we are particularly astute in our telepathy, we will use this to control people as well. Why wouldn't we? This is soul survival. I need to be able to live my life. And if I can intuit what's going on inside of you, and that will clear my path, why wouldn't I do it? Especially if we've been oppressed ourselves. Why wouldn't we use every tool at our disposal to make our path clear? So this is really important to look at if this is within us. Maybe it's not, but maybe it is. For example, we easily will use our empathy to read a room to make sure it's safe. Well, in a lot of families growing up, we had to do that. That was survival. We had to read the room. How's dad doing? How's mom doing? How's my older sibling doing? Is my creepy uncle over? What's going on? So your empathy is hyper-focused out into the room because you need to stay in control of what's going on. And if that's our wiring, out of sheer survival, this is not a character flaw. This is not a maladaptation. This is real. We will continue this into our adulthood, and we will play the room, or we will read the room, or we will be overwhelmed by all the people in the room and just choose not to go anymore. So this is a really interesting thing to look at, the power dynamics that we've lived in our life. Whether they're the power dynamics of other people powering over us, whether it's us having to power over other people, and to be able to do this in this big perspective. Like, this is why it's so beautiful to have that, okay, here's my individual path. Here's the things that have been difficult. Here's the things that have gone well. That's interesting. In our world of judgment, sometimes it's very hard to be objective because we're like, oh, I'm such a screw up. I can't believe I did that. You know what? I can't even look at it, so I'm not going to look at it. So we don't even want to look at it because we're so internally judgmental of it, right? But if we can also look at that big paradigm, if we can also look at the fact that we are just one of 7.5 billion people interacting here, working things out, trying to sort it, interacting with all kinds of personalities that have been extremely unconscious on their own journeys, on their own struggle, right? Suddenly, we can look at all these power dynamics with other people, within ourselves, and say, aha, I see this. I see how I have put walls up so that you cannot read my mind. Because think of that, right? If you can read my mind, I lose my power. Okay, so I'm going to put walls up. Whoa, you can feel my feelings? Walls up, right? Because we're afraid of being dominated. We're afraid of anyone having a leg up or an edge over us. So this is also interesting when we come into this oneness perspective and we really dive in to our own spiritual journey. Because we are spiritual beings as well as physical beings. And we're not just spiritual beings having a physical experience or a physical being having none of that stuff. We are both. We are both energy and matter. We are both divine and physical, and they're meant to play together. So now all of a sudden, if we integrate our oneness paradigm, then we have this beautiful place inside of us that we know we're safe, that another human being can't dominate me. I am one with the cosmos. I am connected to God. I am connected to the total consciousness. This is why we meditate. This is why we do the yoga. This is why we read the sacred texts. This is why we do whatever it is we do that brings us close to that oneness, that sacred life. Because then all of a sudden, someone might try to dominate you, and you sort of just look at them like, what are you doing? Right? And they may be having all kinds of temper tantrums, which can be really scary in a 50-year-old person or older. Or they might throw you guilt trips and do all kinds of things to try to bring you out of your path and onto theirs. And in all kindness, and in all compassion, and in all love, we can look at them from this genuine integrated space and say, you know, this is your path and this is mine. That's all. And they may live in a paradigm that says, no, if you love me, you will leave your path and join me on my path. Maybe. Right? And that's okay. Because again, that's where they are. It's an important realization. And for some reason, your paths crossed. Either through blood or through water. It doesn't matter. Right? But for some reason, you guys are having this conversation, or you're having this difficulty, or you're having this challenge, or you're having this confrontation. And it's important for you, and it's important for them. And it allows you to stay open. It allows you to stay open telepathically. That you can hear what they're thinking. Sure, you know they're disappointed. Sure, they're pissed off and they're thinking of ways to try to get you back on path. And of course they are. Because that's their perspective. We don't have to shut down our telepathy. We just have to not judge them for where they are. And I don't mean where they are like, oh, lowly grasshopper, way back on your path. I don't mean that. I mean, I can't even see their journey. I can't even see their path. But for whatever reason, this is right. And for whatever reason, it's important for me to stand my ground. It's important for me to stand in my truth, my satya, right? And that's a journey, to stand in our own truth and not judge ourselves for having a different path, because that's what we're really doing. If we're all bent out of shape that they have a different path than us and they want me to be on their path, we haven't fully integrated the fact that I have my own mountain to climb. So the world's so funny because we so often think it's about the other person. But as soon as I realize that, I'm really busy climbing my own mountain and I dig it. I like the scenery. I like all of it. And I don't even want you to join me. If our paths cross, awesome. We will sit and enjoy the scenery. Or maybe we'll enjoy a snack together. And then we will continue on our journeys. Another big thing that we have to do if we want to be fully telepathic and fully empathic is to be really aware of ourselves. Be aware of our own states of being. We can't be lying to ourselves about how we are. If we're actually really struggling with things, and it's really easy to be in a state of struggling with things because it's not easy to unpack all these things. It's not easy to unpack experiences that are emotionally loaded and hard and difficult. So we very often are walking through the world with some skeletons in our closet. And I don't mean that as a secret. I mean, we have things that are unresolved. And we're still going to interact with people. And we're still going to be telepathic and we're still going to be empathic. So we don't have to be perfect to be able to do this, but we have to be aware. We have to be self-aware. So for example, on the weekend, I had a beautiful weekend with my partner, and he was making dinner, and he was over in the kitchen, he was making dinner, and he was just happy as anything. And I was sitting on the couch watching him, and he had said, you just sit, and I'm going to make this, and I'm going to make you a drink, and I was actually sitting there absolutely overwhelmed. I was so happy and grateful for this man. And it was so funny. And he's happily kind of making dinner and doing his thing. And all of a sudden he stops and he turns around and he looks at me. And he came over and he sat on the couch. And he said, why am I suddenly all emotional? And then he saw me all verklempt and schmoopy, right? And I said, oh, it's me. And he's like, it must have been. Can you imagine being that clear? That you're actually, you're so happy. And all of a sudden, woof, this emotion comes in and you're like, what? Whoa. You're looking around like, who's that? Right? That's how we want to be. Right? Or if suddenly we feel this anger rise, we're like, whoa. Okay, that's not me. Who's that? And maybe it's someone in the room, or maybe it's someone we're just empathically connected to, like a friend or a loved one or a neighbor. Who knows? Some people's auras are pretty big, but at least it's not ours, and you can kind of go, wow. But if we aren't self-aware, if we're actually really struggling, then we won't know if it's ours or not. and we'll easily internalize it. We'll easily start to chew on ourselves, going, oh my God, what am I upset about now? What am I angry about now? And then we'll almost take something in our life, like a relationship, say, you know what, it's probably that person. That was the funniest thing when I first got divorced, was I realized how often I would become angry or I'd become upset, and I would instantly assume it was my husband. It's like there was so many things that were buried under the carpet over the 20 years, or that were put under the carpet, that it was almost like, I'm angry. Aha, it's that thing under the carpet. that must be what I'm mad about. And then after I was divorced and I was on my own for a while, and I'd get angry and I'd realize, oh, darn it. There's nobody to blame for this. It's me. Or it's not me, but it's not them. That's the important thing. So it's quite an interesting thing how we project our feelings and our thoughts onto the people around us, or we try to match our thought patterns and our feelings to unresolved stories, unresolved issues in our intimate relationships. Another really fascinating application of telepathy and empathy is teaching and sharing in groups. Ever since I started sharing and teaching publicly, at the beginning I would be very nervous because I'm actually an introvert. I would identify as an introvert if I'm going to label myself, which is curious because I've been teaching for a long time. But I know this because when I go into a room, and let's say I'm teaching or I'm doing a talk for a service club or a very mixed group, not like people coming to hear a spiritual talk or a yoga class or something like that. But if I'm teaching to a big crowd with very, very disparate and different people, literally my heart is pounding out of my chest because my brain is trying to sort this out. And it's almost like the telepathy and the empathy, like it's just like you're so overwhelmed and I so desperately want to do a good job, but it's like the noise is so high, like I don't even know what to say. And I learned after a few really difficult times, I would sit quietly and I would write down a basic point of my talk, whatever it was here, the basic points I want to hit. And then I would just tune in and I would ask for guidance. And I would listen for the words to come. And what was really interesting about this, I would just start to speak. And then all of a sudden I would turn my head and I would start to speak over there. And then I would turn my head and I would literally be telling all these crazy stories. And I almost felt very, like monkey mind almost, like da-dun, 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 da-dun. And I'm like doing this thing and I'm just telling stories all over the place. And all of a sudden there'd be this moment when it was like that pin drop, or that everything was dead silent in the ethers. And then I could actually speak. And it was quite a while before I realized what was happening, or what I believe was happening. That it was almost like I could hear the questions people had, or I could hear their doubt about what I was saying. And so I would just sort of start telling these stories until it was almost like the answers were all in the room as well. And then everybody was sewn up together. And when I can trust that, it's really magical. And then I always laugh because then I say, does anyone have any questions? There's just like this dead silence. But I think this is the point of telepathy and empathy, that we were actually communicating telepathically and empathically in the room. This isn't interesting from my perspective, right? It's not like, Katrina, she can do this speaking thing. I think it was a mutual telepathic and empathic communication. Can you imagine if that's how we learned? Like sometimes I think that's one of the big reasons that our gatherings here, even on Insight Timer, why I love them so much. Because everybody here is so interesting. And even though we're communicating over the internet, which is just an energy system, I believe there is a telepathic and empathic connection, which causes me to, as much as I have a general sense of what I want to talk about and main points I want to make in our talks, that it's actually you guys that fill out the details. You know, somebody asks a question, but I don't mean in the chat even, I mean through the ethers, because we really are all one. So very often after the talk is done and I edit the video or whatever, I'll listen to the talk and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Because it didn't come from me. It came from us. It was the collective empathic, telepathic experience that created the talk. I may be the talking head, right? I may be the one that happens to be saying it out my mouth, but I'm pretty sure this didn't all come out of me. Can you imagine how joyful it would be to share that way? You know, this is truly living in that telepathic, empathic way, right? So I'm going to put my glasses on. And if you have any questions, I would love to answer them. What to do when it's our anger that has justification and now needs to be discussed or at least understood? It's a great question. When we imagine ourselves in this collective space, then I believe that anger, not tantrums or rage or what we've identified as being anger for the last millennia, but true anger, I believe it comes up for a good reason. So that means that we don't actually have to be emotionally activated by it, but we need to stand in it, that this is important. And so as we stand in it, if the other person can't hear it, then we listen within for more guidance. We ask for more words. We ask for actions to be taken. I remember one time, a friend of mine, her mother-in-law was an alcoholic, and she really wanted her children to know of their grandma, but she would always come and she would have been drinking. And my friend put it up with it for a long time, but she struggled and she tried to fix them and she tried to change their mind and she tried to, reach them in all kinds of ways, but nothing was working. And one day she just said to the mother-in-law, I'm sorry, but you can't come over if you're drinking. I know, but I have the right to see my grandchildren. Well, that's fine. But you can't come in the house if you're drinking. And there was something very solid in that. Was it anger? Sure. But there's something solid in it. There's something sober in it. And I don't mean that about the drinking. I mean emotionally sober about it. And the mother-in-law was mad and she left and she didn't see her grandkids for 2 years. And then one day she showed up sober. So there's something really powerful about just listening for the truth within the anger. That the anger gives us the strength to stand in our truth and then ask for more guidance. Because if it's righteous, and I mean that if it's really in alignment with the greater good, guidance will come. But we have to be open to it, whatever it is. And it may not be what we expect. Sometimes people say, don't judge me. There is a difference between judging another and judging if they are healthy for you. Is that right? Yes, judgment versus discernment. It's hard to separate ourselves from judgment. Like it's not easy. And sometimes I know I can feel, oh no, I'm not judging them. And I am. I don't want to admit that I am, but I am. I think they're making a bad choice. I think they're mean. I think they're too angry. I think they're too cynical. I am judging them. I think it's a challenging dance right now as we learn how to be discerning without judgment. And maybe we have to feel the judgment before we can be discerning. Right? And I think there is a journey there to take. And I know I'm still taking it. There's sometimes that I can be completely discerning. Just nope, just don't feel that today. Nope, I just don't want to do that. But sometimes we're almost, I don't want to say forced into judgment, but it feels like that sometimes. Because you might say no. You say, no, I don't really feel like doing that. Well, why not? And then you're almost asked for the judgment. Well, because I think that person's mean, or because I don't like doing that, or because it's almost the conversation almost asks us for the judgment, right? So it's an interesting thing to even avoid the conversations that are asking us for the explanation. Like I remember after I divorced, people would say to me, so what happened? Why did you divorce? And honestly, my answer to them was, you've been married. I don't even understand your question. Like anyone who's ever been in a long-term relationship knows the challenges and the ups and downs of being in one. What do you mean, what happened? But they're looking for the big judgment. They're looking for the big thing. Oh, did this happen? Did this happen? It's like, no, we were just two souls that lived together and grew together and challenged each other for 20 years. And our paths diverged. But we feel like we owe the world a judgment. Oh, well, he was wrong. Like it's like put in a court of law, I was right, he was wrong, so we divorced. It's like, not even close. Right? So it's a really interesting dance between the judgment and discernment. Not easy. At least I don't find it easy. It's I think it's almost like a continuum, that if here's judgment and here's discernment, it's like we're always sort of dancing somewhere in between. Sometimes we're really good at just clear, unbiased discernment, and sometimes we're in so much judgment we can't sleep, and sometimes we're somewhere in between, even if we're aiming for discernment. But it feels like quite a journey to get there. How do you feel this pertains to coaching and helping those who ask for it? Or like us being here for guiding and talks? Oh, it's such a good question. So if I go for help to somebody, then I'm asking for their intuitive sense of my story. Because what happens is, on my own, in isolation, I can get really confused. And what happens is, we have these issues in our lives that if we can't deal with them, we kind of wall them away. And then this one gets walled away for good reason, right? Because something bad's happened at home and I've still got to go to work, so I'm just going to tuck that into the corners. But then sometimes we never get a chance to unpack those things, and they just keep building and building. So we end up living in this tiny little area in between all the difficulties. It's kind of like our comfort zone, literally. And we end up living in there. And then we don't know why we feel contracted. We don't know why we feel like we have no choice. We don't know why we feel like we feel weak and unable to really stand up for ourselves. And left to our own devices, we may never have those places challenged. So maybe we find a trusted counselor. And we go to that counselor and we say, well, here's my story, and here's what I'm struggling with, and here's this experience, and here's what this person said, and this is what I did. The other person will be able to hear your winding path, right? They'll be able to hear the fact that, why are you avoiding something? What are we not talking about here? There's something about your story that's not quite making sense to me. And they might say, like, right there, when you jumped from there to there, what were you jumping around? Like, what did you avoid? Well, I guess, yeah, I guess I do avoid conflict. And so I kind of feel like I don't have the option to say, you know what I mean? So that other person, you are asking for their insight. You know, we aren't islands. You know, we are able to help each other. I do this all the time. You know, this is what my friends are for. Not, that's not what they're for. But if I'm struggling with something, I'm like, hey, can we talk about something? Yeah, sure. And I talk about it. And then if they hear me get twisty about it, they'll go, whoa, 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 back up a bit. Why did you jump to that conclusion? Why did you think they said that? They meant that when they said that? Because their mind didn't go there, but yours did. What's going on there? Right? I'm asking for their guidance. This is, again, we're back into our empathic, telepathic thing, where the other person has been asked to open all the channels and say, because sometimes even as a counselor or a coach, you know, you can be listening to someone and you can hear what they're saying with their mouth, but then you can hear other things. Like you can hear other thoughts that they're not saying. And sometimes I'll say, do you want me to be totally honest with you? Like, do you want me to tell you what I'm hearing? Sure, right? And it just opens that up. So sometimes it's a really good thing to ask someone for guidance. And what's interesting about even coming to a talk like this, we aren't islands. There are lots of people out there that have very interesting perspectives that we might want to hear. Maybe I'm really interested in addictions, and I really want to listen to Gabor Mate for a while. Or maybe I'm really intrigued with, you know, quantum physics, so I'm going to go and listen to David Bohm speak, right? But I'm not listening so that they can tell me how to live my life. I'm listening with my questions at the helm. I'm looking for other answers that I might not have ever heard before. And sometimes all we're actually listening for is for that other person to put words to what I already know. Or that other person creates a context for a wisdom I already have. Right? I'm not sure we learn as much as we simply affirm what we deeply already know inside. And so we all gather together here to sort of share in that, yes, I knew that. Yeah, okay, I'm not crazy. Whew, okay. You know? One thing that's really intriguing to me is I love teaching about truth and satya, right? I even created a yoga academy called Satya Yoga Academy. But isn't it interesting that we have to learn how to follow our truth? That we have actually been conditioned to not listen to our truth. So suddenly, to gather together for a talk or to read a book or something, we literally are practicing feeling the truth inside of us and letting it, seeing if that resonates with what I'm hearing. Or maybe I hear something I don't like and it goes in and it challenges one of those conditionings. So I feel like that's all we're really doing, is we're just gathering to hear truth. And does it resonate with me or doesn't it? And because it's something we actually have to learn. So thank you so much for being here. And I hope you have a wonderful day.